you and your client alleging happened over at Penn State?
Well, if you read the complaint, what happened is my client was a student athlete who was recruited from Penn State on athletic scholarship. And when he got there, the other stronger players would dominate, haze, harass, bully the younger players. So he was one of the younger players, one of the smaller players. He was a cornerback or safety. He's a speedster. Mm-hmm. And the bigger, stronger players would assert their dominance on him in the locker room.
Was it a culture, or was it just, two or players and the coach apparently, just involved in, some offshoot, or is it more institutionalized?
Other people have asked me that. Is it a culture? I don't have enough evidence for me to draw a conclusion that it's a culture. All I know is that his experience when he was there, it happened to him and it happened to other players, and it wasn't just an isolated incident. Mm-hmm. And this just wasn't horseplay where kids are wrestling in the locker room. This was a display of humiliation, emasculation. They would take him down, restrain him, and then while he's restrained in a display of what I would say dominance, they would simulate sexual acts. That's not kid stuff. Mm-hmm. That's not horseplay. That's not roughhousing. That's humiliation. And that's misconduct. And the coach knew about it, or the evidence will demonstrate that the coach was told about it. Not only Coach Franklin, but other coaches on the Penn State program were notified of the behavior and didn't take the appropriate, overt action to make sure that the behavior was stopped. They should have reported it. They should have stopped it. That didn't happen.
One thing real quick, just straighten your tie just a little bit. You can't, just right in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, a little more to the left.
Left.
Your left, yeah.
Good.
Cool, yeah.
So, from a lawyer standpoint, would you think that, part of the complaint read that I'm going to Sandusky you? Would part of your thinking be that Penn State and its football program would have cleaned up its act over the last few years since the Sandusky trial since the Sandusky trial?
You would think so. You would think that there would be more attention and more sensitivity given to events like this. I don't have an explanation for it. Mm-hmm. I think it's troubling. I think it's unsettling. But with the money now that we have an understanding that football or college football generates, some colleges want to avoid scandal, and that's understandable.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that Penn State may have covered it up because of for money, or for
not for money, but I think you can draw the conclusion that Penn State did not want another scandal. Mm-hmm. That would be something reasonable that someone could conclude. When this behavior that would offend the sensibility of an ordinary person is occurring in the locker room on a continued and pervasive basis, that's a reasonable conclusion.
The school says that they had an internal investigation, that they proved that these allegations did not necessarily happen. What is your client suing for now?
Well, let me ask you that question in two parts. Penn State does have an Office of Sexual Misconduct Prevention and Response, and they did conduct an investigation. And the investigation that they conducted, their findings were submitted to the Office of Student Counsel to prosecute one of the players for violating the Student Conduct Code. And the allegation and the prosecution against that player was founded by the Office of Student Counsel. Now, I don't know what the exact charges were. I haven't seen that. But I suspect that the charges that brought about the prosecution were predicated upon the acts of abuse that happened in the locker room. So there is an Office of Misconduct, and there was an investigation, and there was a charge, and it was founded. The problem with it is that my client was subject to this harassment and bullying and hazing in the calendar year of 2018. The complaint that triggered the investigation didn't occur until May of 2019, some 6 months later. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If the coaches knew of it in the calendar year of 2018, why wasn't something done before the damage to my boy was irreparable?
Mm-hmm. A lot of this, a lot of this happened in the locker room. Many of us have been in locker rooms before. Were some of this hazing done in different points of different periods of undress? Were they showering in the shower and all of a sudden your client is now getting hazed while naked?
There was incidents involving clothes on and clothes off, where they would simulate these sexual acts. And it wouldn't happen just once. It would happen on a daily basis, on a continuing basis, not only to my client, but to other athletes.
Did your client say that he was, is he embarrassed? Is he
Humiliated, emasculated, to the point that he resigned his scholarship. This is a kid with football pedigree. His father was an ex-Penn State football player. His father was an ex-NFL player. This is a boy with good athletic ability. This is a boy who can compete at the Division I level. He was recruited by Penn State, and he resigned his scholarship. Now imagine that choice in lifestyle. He is recruited heavily. He chooses Penn State. They promise to keep him safe. He comes to school, and then he has to resign and change his lifestyle and go to a different school. That gives you an example or demonstrates how pervasive it was.
What are you guys suing for? Is it monetary damages or
Change. He wants change. He wants vindication. He wants the nation to know that he didn't leave Penn State because he wanted to. He left because he was compelled to, because of what happened there. And how do you promote change? I mean, what this kid's doing, it takes a lot of courage to come out. He's still in a locker room setting. He's still on a Division I football team in California. Imagine what he has to go through every day, and he's the subject of a spotlight. There's enough pressure on Division I athletes, and he has to accommodate this as well. So, what he's doing takes courage to come forward and say that this happened to me. These humiliating events happened to me in a locker room, and I'm willing to come before the nation and use my lifestyle as an example for change. It's difficult. I suspect other players will come forward as well.
how old is your client?
He's 20 now, I think. He just
20
turned
now, so you're
20.
talking about-
He's 19, 20.
So we're talking about this happened his freshman year
Right.
by upperclassmen.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
There were some kids his age, but they were looked as leaders of the team.
Okay.
But most of them, is my understanding, that were the participants were upperclassmen who displayed dominance against the younger players.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you're saying that it's now, some of it was the culture there at the school that the coach knew about because your client reported it, but then did nothing to protect your client and the other students who were apparently victims of this hazing.
I don't know if I would call it culture.
Mm-hmm.
I would just call it a failure of the coach to protect his athletes and provide them with a safe sporting environment, which I think is his duty, or any reasonable person would suggest it's his duty. Not only does he have a statutory duty, he has a common law duty, and I would say a contractual duty to make sure his athletes are safe. And every reasonable person, every reasonable father who sends his child, or parent who sends their child to compete at a university would expect that.